And there we go.
Got it. All right. And thank you, everybody, for coming. Welcome to our Education Workforce Housing Forum. And my name is Consuelo Lara. I am presently on the Contra Costa County Board of Education and the board president. And teacher housing has been something we've been talking about for quite a while. Teacher housing, education, workforce housing. And I'm a retired teacher. And I taught for 38 years, but 16 of those years in West Contra Costa, Richmond High, Helms Middle School. And I was also on the school board for 2 years of West Contra Costa. So right now we are in this crisis, of course. And when I go to the school site councils at Richmond High, they have about 20 teachers or 60 teachers, and about 20 of them are not coming back next year. So we do have, in some areas, it's more of a crisis than others, but we're here for one reason, and that is for the students. We want to attract and retain high quality educators and workforce for our schools. And it's so difficult to live here and stay and for them to work in the communities where they work. So we have a teacher shortage crisis, we have a housing crisis, and now there is a budget crisis for declining enrollment and lots of reasons. Education funding is decreasing. So this is something where all three of those things intersect. So we can look at how do we improve the workforce recruitment and retention. How do we create low or income housing in Contra Costa? And how do we provide a predictable stream for school districts for revenue? So, and I just want to say that all of this started with a resolution. Board members, school board members, it started with a resolution that gives people that vision and moves them forward. Did I skip a slide here? Housekeeping. Yes, this it's being recorded, and we want you to put your questions in the chat because that's going to help us with our next steps. And especially put in all your questions, all your challenges, and all of the barriers that may come across. So that we have that to work on as we go forward. So please keep your camera off and mute yourself. All right, what's the next slide? Is this all righty, and our agenda, we have Assembly Member, the Director, Dean Wallace, Director for Buffy Wicks. We have Tim Grayson, Assembly Member, and Troy Flint from the California School Board Association, Preston Ham and Ruchi Bindal to talk about a sample project. It's very impressive. Martin Lueng from Bridge Housing, Maureen Toms, Contra Costa County Deputy Director, Policy Planning, and myself. So then we'll have our Q&A and our closing steps. All righty, and now we will have our moderator, John Sasaki, who will introduce himself, and he'll be our moderator for this exciting forum. All right.
Thank you, Consuelo. Good evening, everyone. It's so good to see everyone. I'm honored to serve as your moderator this evening. It's great to see so many old friends here. Let me just say, as communications director for Oakland Unified School District, we often see how the high cost of housing impacts our schools. We're a week and a half away from the start of this next school year, and we're hiring a lot of people. As you can imagine, we hire hundreds of teachers every year. And this year, and I would say just about every year, we get to the point of nearly hiring some people from outside the area, and then they back out at the last minute when they realize how expensive housing is here. So we're always in search of solutions for this difficult problem, and we look forward to hearing some really great ideas tonight and share ideas if at all possible. So why don't we toss it to Mr. Dean Wallace, District Director for Assemblymember Buffy Wicks, who represents Oakland and part of Contra Costa County. Look forward to hearing from you, Mr. Wallace.
Thank you, John. Thanks everyone for hosting this event. Assemblymember Wicks, Buffy sends her regards. She regrettably wasn't able to attend today. She's taking some much needed downtime with her family and is on vacation now, but she sends her apologies for not being able to attend. As you all know, Assemblymember Wicks is currently the chair of the Housing Committee in the State Assembly, where she's been working on very important housing production bills like AB 2011, SB 423 this year, and also AB 1657 to put a housing bond on the March 2024 ballot. But what's been driving her work and the work of many of her colleagues in the legislature and our governor has been a focus on housing production bills. Bills to ensure that the housing needs of Californians are met with sufficient supply to address this housing crisis and the much needed need for more housing. As you all probably know, the 2010s was the lowest housing production decade since 1960, so in the past 60 years. And we're seeing the results of that most acutely for our younger generations and for our working class folks. And that includes our teachers and our school employees. And it's driving up costs, it's making housing unaffordable, and it's created a slew of problems, as you all have been acutely aware of and experiencing when it comes to retention and recruitment. So the challenge facing school districts, as you all know, is rent-burdened teachers and school staff. Up to 50% of teachers and school employees are rent-burdened, so that means 30% or more of their income is going towards rent. And this is impacting folks across the board, even folks who have been in our school districts for some time as rents continue to go up. It's impacting recruitment and retention. And as I mentioned, and you're all aware of, it's driven by the lack of adequate housing production to meet our state's needs. And many of our school board members in the district and across the state were coming to our legislative offices with a solution that they wanted to use their land to create education workforce housing. They have a large supply of land available, but they face the slew of challenges to build that housing. So just to give you some numbers to sort of outline how big a opportunity this presented, over 150,000 acres of land across the state are owned by school districts or education-related agencies, and even at modest densities. So, you know, in the 30 units per acre range, you could create over 1.5 million to 2 million homes for that workforce, well above what would be needed for our school teachers and school employees. So that was the solution. But the resistance that school districts were coming up against was local resistance from local electeds, restrictive zoning that was preventing them from creating the housing on their land, and also, you know, complicated and lengthy bureaucratic processes. And it would create prohibitive delays, both in time and then increasing costs, which created hurdles that got in the way from them being able, from all of you, from being able to be part of the solution. So the result was that despite the high interest by school districts throughout the state to be part of the solution, the average educational workforce housing project in the state prior to AB 2295 would take more than 7 years to complete. So the legislature stepped in and had a solution. And with that, our next speaker is going to present the solution that the legislature came up with.
And that, of course, is Tim Grayson, Assembly member from District 15, including Pleasant Hill, my hometown here. So, Mr. Grayson, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate it. And also, I just want to give credit to Chuck Carpenter for his tenacity and the attention that he's giving to this issue. And then also, I want to honor our chair of housing in the Assembly, Assemblymember Buffy Wicks, for her leadership and the great work that she has been doing not just for just her district, but she is literally laying it on the line for the entire state of California and really addressing housing issues and getting to the core of things. So good evening, everyone. I really am honored, humbled to be with you tonight. And thank you for inviting me to join you all. It's no secret. Some of the things I may say here may be a bit repetitive, but you as teachers would know that repetition is good. It's no secret that the state's in the middle of a housing and affordability crisis that's been decades in the making. California, home to 40 million people, nearly 1/3 of the nation's homeless population is housed or is here in California. And the numbers are growing much faster than in other states. As a matter of fact, most Californians cannot afford to buy a house, a home here in California. And more than half of renters are rent burdened, as was described by the prior speaker. In addition to all that, California has never produced the number of housing units that our state demands on an annual basis. By some accounts, you would find that California needed to build as many as 3.5 million housing units more than it did over the last 3 decades to keep up with the demand. And until we do more to increase the production to meet that demand, housing costs will continue to increase and soar. So the gap in affordability hits our community especially hard here in Contra Costa. 67,000 renter households in Contra Costa pay more than 30% of their household income towards rent or mortgage. 35% of all owner households in Contra Costa with a mortgage are in that same boat. So since I got in the assembly and now working shoulder to shoulder with Assembly Member Wicks, we focused really hard on cutting the cost on new development. We're trying to find ways that we can build much needed homes in a faster way, protecting renters while we ultimately build our way out of this crisis. But there's a lot more to be done. Our state's housing crisis substantially impacts many of those in our county's education workforce. The salaries simply haven't kept up with the cost of living in the Bay Area, and we're feeling that impact. Too many of our teachers, too many of our school staff can no longer live in the community that they teach in, and they're forced to commute hours every day. I'm not telling you anything new, then you already know this. High housing costs, stagnant wages, long commutes are keeping folks from working in public education. And if we want the best for our students, and if we want the best for families, we need to implement local, and we need to implement statewide strategies to ensure that we're actually creating stable and committed communities inside and outside of our schools. So the housing crisis substantially impacts many of our state's 650,000 employees of local education agencies, aka LEAs. Over 1/3 of these employees pay over 30% of their income towards housing, including 31% of teachers and nearly half of all other LEA employees that are not school administrators. So last year, again, proud to support AB 2295, which eased some of the administrative and the bureaucratic hurdles that school districts faced in constructing education workforce housing. Now, throughout the state, there are over 1,000 LEAs, which collectively own, as we learned before, more than 150,000 acres of land. And according to some research, the land owned by LEAs, there are at least 7,068 properties with potentially developable land of 1 acre or more that total 75,000 acres statewide. At a modest density of 30 dwelling units per acre, such properties could contain 2.3 million units of housing, more than enough to house the state's 300,000 teachers and 350,000 other LEA employees. So despite this potential, there's still very little housing on LEA property. From the lack of expertise to the lack of zoning approvals, there is a myriad of impediments to facilitate housing development. AB 2295 authorizes housing development projects to be an allowable use on any real property owned by an LEA. and for these developments to provide first priority to local education agency employees. So under this recent legislation, local government would still be able to apply its own zoning. It would still be able to have design review standards as long as they do not preclude the project from being 3 stories or 35 feet in height and allow density that accommodates at least 30 units per acre in urban areas and 20 units per acre in suburban areas and 10 units per acre in rural areas. So AB 2295 it'll become effective next year. And what I'm hopeful for is that this will enhance certainty, it'll increase flexibility, and it will streamline the process of developing educator workforce housing on school land. This will help districts recruit, retain teachers, and school staff. I'm excited. I'm excited for our school districts throughout the county to begin exploring affordable housing options for our public education workforce and to create a truly livable community. I understand the apprehension that may exist because school boards are not in the housing development business. But that's what we have housing developers for school boards to partner with developers. Together, they can work with local governments and put AB, actually on the screen it says 29, it's 2295, AB 2295 to work, implement it, exercise it in local communities, get local officials on board with you, and let's build housing for education workforce, and let's meet the needs and create a more affordable environment for our educators to be able to live, work, and play in the community that they teach in. With that, thank you again very much. So honored to be with you here tonight, and continue to look forward. My office is always available. Please feel free to reach out, ask questions. We do stand ready to call on the legislative analysts to provide legal opinions on any obstacle that may arise when trying to work with AB 2295.
Mr. Grayson, thank you very much. Appreciate that. All right, next up, we're representing the California School Boards Association with membership of over 1,000 educational agencies. Please welcome Troy Flint. Mr. Flint.
Good evening. I am not Troy Flint. Troy had some trouble getting in, so I'm going to take over for him. But hopefully you're in good hands because my name is Andrew Keller. I'm with the California School Boards Association, and I am the lead for our work in workforce housing. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I've got a handful of slides here that we'll walk through. And I want to talk a little bit about what CSBA is doing to support our members in this. And hopefully this is exciting because I'm going to announce something here that has not been made public and I think might be interesting to some of you all. So I'll try and get through this pretty quick because our partners here have done a really great job kind of outlining what we feel are some of the background information about why there's a need for this work. So starting here, we want to talk a little bit about our report that we did as a collaboration with City Lab at UCLA and a couple of organizations at UC Berkeley, the Center for Cities and Schools and the Turner Center for Housing and Innovation. This research was funded by the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. They have a large interest in affordable housing here in California. And they approached us and our partners at the university level to really think about, well, what does this look like to use district property to solve this kind of intractable problem and address the teacher retention issues and ultimately get to better student outcomes. So this was the first of its kind research looking at the use of property for teacher and staff housing. And it resulted in a workbook, a large research report, and more importantly, a how-to handbook, which I would flash here if I had it handy. I've got the report here, and it's a beast. It's a wonderful multi-page report, but you can access this in PDF form along with the handbook itself at csba.org/workforcehousing. That's the link at the bottom of the page. Please visit that and bookmark it because that's going to be the location where we put a number of other resources that I'll touch on in a moment. But that's the initial salvo that we have, and that's where we got involved with this work for our members. So they approached us obviously because they wanted to talk to you all and understand, well, what can be done to help school board members who are ultimately the decision makers here to move these projects forward. So we've talked about this. I'm going to skip over the why housing because I feel like that's been covered. We talk a little bit about statistics, and some of these graphics are pulled directly from the book, so don't worry if you can't read them. They're all available through that link I provided. Some of these numbers are familiar. More importantly for you all, we wanted to provide an answer to this question: are you a candidate for housing? And so some of the statistics that our researchers looked at are, well, what is the turnover rate? What's the percentage of beginning teachers? And those are both about 12%. Those are key indicators. So if you're over 12% for teacher turnover, you've got more than 12% of your teaching workforce is beginning teachers. It's a good indicator that this might be for you. The other one, which is kind of the big one, is median asking rent in the county. That's typically not affordable for some of your early teachers or some of your classified staff on the lower ranges of your salary schedule. And so the ratio we want to look at is the scheduled salary should be greater than about 80% of the area median income. I believe that might be less than. I have to double check that numbers. But it can be kind of a risky proposition. You all aren't in the business of building housing. It's a new thing. But the benefits, as you've heard here, you can recruit and retain qualified staff, reduce commute times. It helps incorporate your staff into the communities that you serve. And it's not something that the private sector is doing that great of a job solving. So that's why CSBA is interested in this area. It's something that we can provide as an educational approach to our members. And that's something that our members seek out for us, is training and education. So in terms of what does it look like doing a project like this? Typically, these projects are 3 to 5 years or longer, but there's a ton of factors that influence whether any project is feasible. And really the timing. So again, in the handbook, you'll have a number of graphics that'll detail all of the steps here, but at a high level, you're going to spend a lot of time doing preliminary exploration, anywhere from 1 year to 2 years. It can be longer. In a few cases, it's shorter. A lot of the projects that are live right now, Jefferson Union and Daly City, for example, is one that took a shorter time, but the circumstances in that district were fairly unique. But generally, the research bears out about 3 to 5 years, maybe a little bit more. And the factors that go in there are zoning, the financing strategy. Are you going out with bonds? Are you using LIHTC? What's the mix that you have to fund these projects? Your community support or opposition, legislation like AB 2295, which our partners here, City Lab, Dr. Dana Cuff and Judy Blumenthal were the kind of architects of the idea, and they worked with Assemblymember Bloom to write that, and we became co-sponsors of that legislation. So we're very happy that got passed. But other factors, things like your tenants. What's the population you're looking to serve? A lot of these projects get greenlit because they serve not just the workforce, but they also provide a percentage of units that are open to the community or open to other members in other counties, or other citizens and residents of other counties. So there's some factors there that change your financing strategy depending on who you're looking to serve in these units. And then ultimately your the support and opposition within your own district, whether it's your colleagues on your board or your colleagues in the county or the city or whatever municipality you're in. So this has been attempted before in a few places. There's a number of districts, 46 of them that we know of, that have attempted this work prior to 2022. 83 different sites were investigated in areas like Daly City, Palo Alto, Los Angeles, and LAUSD have done a lot of work on this. We've worked with Al Grazioli over there and in LAUSD to understand what they did. And a lot of these aren't really replicable projects until AB 2295. So we're really excited about the future here, but this is not something that has been attempted successfully until recently. Some of the success stories that you'll hear, and I'm sure many of you have had a chance to meet some of the folks at Jefferson Unified, Kalima Salahuddin, Andy Lee. They're really great at being champions and advocates for this work. But just to show you what it looks like, this is an actual building that they opened up tenancy for, I believe it was last year, 51 bedroom homes. You've got the numbers here, I won't read it to you. They have a lot of amenities here, and they did a lot of work thinking about what's the lifestyle that these particular tenants are going to want to really make it more desirable than your average apartment building. So there's a lot here. This URL at the bottom is Jefferson Union High School District's webpage. That's the link that will take you to a website where they have information about the actual project itself. It's not the place where you go if you're a tenant or if you're looking for housing. It's the place where the district talks about that project. At the bottom of that page, there's a link that says for other districts. They really understand that they're out in front on this, and they want other folks like you all to look at their story, learn from their lessons, so that you can move your own projects forward. One of the key things about their success is that they established this Education Housing Corporation. The board set this up. It's a nonprofit. It's there to manage operations, and they oversee the property, the third-party property manager, the operations of the building, the budget, the rules and eligibility, who are our tenants. And they have a board, and the board consists of 2 of the trustees for the district and a number of community members and non-resident staff. It's a really interesting model, I think, is worth considering, especially because school districts aren't in this business, and it really shouldn't be part of your core function. So they stood up this corporation to kind of take that business away from the district and really from your schedules there. I hope I'm not boring anybody, but so Success Story, where are they today? They've had over 90 units are occupied. Additional staff are in the leasing process. And one of the things we heard at our conference last year, Trustee Salahuddin spoke up and said that this is huge for retention for them. And even the superintendent was there saying, yeah, this is a big thing for them, and they're seeing some results already from having this facility in their region. So this is the cool part here. What's next for CSBA here, and ultimately what's going to land on your doorstep that you'll be able to take away. So what we did after that research report is we did a pilot academy to train a number of districts to see, hey, can we take that workbook, or that handbook rather, and turn it into some training so that we can get board members up to speed, and not just board members, but other partners in their region, staff members, their HR folks or their facilities folks, and get them trained up on how to approach these projects from an early stage, from a very novice perspective. We don't know anything about it. How do you build these things? So what they did is they worked with staff from UCLA and UC Berkeley to go through some workbooks and really do the diligence and identify, hey, what problem are we trying to solve? Who is our student population, or who is our teacher population rather, and our staff population? What are their needs exactly? And what sites do we have that we could build? How many units are possible on some of these sites? So they got a lot of one-on-one support, also from industry experts to talk about financing. They talked to architects. It was a really, really cool project. And ultimately, at the end of this, all of their projects have advanced. Even one of the districts had a significant amount of turnover in their trustees, but they're still moving their project forward. And part of it is due to what they were able to accomplish in this academy. They have like a whole PowerPoint deck that identifies the problem. It's really, really valuable. And for you all, they generated a number of resources, things like board resolutions, staff surveys, the workbook itself, like that's going to be released. All of those are coming soon. And that will be on that webpage I highlighted, csba.org/workforce housing. And ultimately, we have as a very conservative estimate, 550 new units of housing at a minimum. And that's if each of those develops one site of all the sites that they had evaluated, and each of them evaluated at least 1 or 2, and a couple of them evaluated like 5 or 6. So there's potentially a lot of new housing units going forward just based on that alone. So we took that back to Chen Zuckerberg, and they liked those results. And so we just got a grant a week and a half ago, July 18th, to continue this work. I'm personally really excited about it. I mean, I wrote the application, so we're really stoked to be able to take that work and expand it. You're the first to hear about it. So we're going to be doing a second cohort of districts at a 101 level. That's, what do you do here? Let's get oriented to the topics. Let's get used to the terms. Let's start a workbook and do the diligence. We're going to do a new cohort of districts. That'll be coming hopefully in the next 3 to 4 months once we build out all the changes and improvements and figure out how we're going to do recruiting, because we're going to try and scale it up. Then we're also going to do a 201 cohort. This is for districts that are maybe a little bit further along or have been through 101 and are now at the stage where they want to try and get an RFP drafted and ready for approval by the board. So that's going to be the goal for that one. And then they're going to do some additional studies on what is the impact long-term on post-occupancy. So for Jefferson Union, for example, what is the impact on turnover? Are there measurable outcomes in terms of students? And do they benefit more from having a consistent cadre of teachers coming through that district? And then the other piece of research that the university folks are going to take on is the role of county offices of education. It's not immediately clear what counties can do legally and cannot do in this space in regards to actually building housing. There's a number of examples that are out there. Santa Clara comes to mind that are actually working on some of this stuff. But we want to see from a research perspective what can be done and what improvements can be made and possibly proposed to some of our legislative friends in the same vein as AB 2295. And again, we'll come out with some additional resources from that work. But that's coming up from starting about in the fall through the next couple of years. So we're really excited about that. And stay tuned to that, to both your blast, your email blast that we send out, your weekly blast. Make sure you've opted into those from CSBA and you'll be first to hear about it. And we'll make sure we post more information onto that website. But that's where we're at and what we have coming. So I'll go ahead and stop right there and free to answer any questions, but I know you all have to move on. But please take a look at that website, bookmark it, download. I wouldn't recommend printing out that report, but if you want to send it to a printer and get a spiral bound copy, it's a great reference to have as you're going through all this stuff. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Mr. Keller, thank you very much. Hang with us because we are going to have Q&A here coming up in a little bit as soon as everybody's gotten a chance to talk. And so next up, we have the project designers from UC Berkeley. They're Preston Lamb and Ruchi Bindal, created a project called Bears for Built Equity in Alvarado Village. Gentlemen, go ahead and take it away, please. Oh, excuse me, gentleman and lady.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen really quickly, and then we can go ahead and get started. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
All right, great. All right, well, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here this evening with you all. If I wasn't working in affordable housing, I would have been an educator. So educated workforce housing is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. It's also an exciting time for me to see different industries come together, including housing and community development, education, and public policy to solve the regional housing crisis, because this work truly requires a multi-sector and interdisciplinary approach. All right. So hi, everyone. My name's Preston, and I'm co-presenting this evening with my colleague, Ruchi. We both recently graduated from UC Berkeley's College of Environmental Design. And while we were graduate students, we participated in a real estate competition among national universities hosted by Bank of America called the Low Income Housing Challenge. And as part of that competition, we developed a proposal for educated workforce housing in Richmond called Alvarado Village that we'll be sharing with you all today. Before we dive in, I just want to note that there's a lot of information in this presentation, and our goal is to highlight the key points on each slide. Today, we'll walk you through our approach to the first two phases of our proposal for Alvarado Village. Handing it over to you, Ruchi.
Thank you so much, Preston. Going forward, we would like to present how we initiated educator workforce housing in Richmond. Development projects have 6 discrete phases, although for this presentation, we'll only be focusing on the first 2 phases. For Alvarado, we undertook an exhaustive study through site, market, and zoning analysis, followed by entitlements, and ultimately the design and financial feasibility. Preston and I worked on a 7-person interdisciplinary team to produce our proposal for Alvarado Village. So it truly takes a team to accomplish this work. But you might be asking yourself at this point, how do I pay for consultants to help develop educator workforce housing in my school district? One way the school districts can generate income through developing housing is by ground lease payments. Under a ground lease, the school district retains ownership of the land and leases development rights to a real estate developer. In exchange for these development rights, the real estate developer pays the school district either through one lump sum payment at construction start or ongoing annual payments once the building is in operation. Another way school districts can generate revenue to pay for consultants is to sell land within its portfolio that isn't suitable for a school or a housing development. School districts also can provide loans to land buyers and collect interest from those loans. These are just a few ways that school districts can leverage housing development to generate revenue to support district operations. Question?
All right, so starting with phase one of our educator workforce housing proposal. We were motivated to look at sites owned by school districts because of new state legislation like AB 2295, which allows housing on school district-owned land without rezoning. Our thinking as we were narrowing in on potential sites was that adult education schools are good candidates to pair with housing developments because the daily use of adult education schools is less intensive than K-12 schools. We ended up selecting Alvarado School for our proposal because there's more than 1 acre available for a new development without displacing, or rather disturbing, the school district's current operations. I also grew up down the street from Alvarado, so I knew from experience driving by it every day that it was an underutilized site with a lot of development potential. All right, so moving into phase two. The entire site is about 3.3 acres, but we ended up proposing a development on the bottom third of the site below the dotted line because we felt very strongly that the pairing of adult education with housing on the same site could be mutually beneficial. We looked at state legislation like AB 2295, as I mentioned previously, as well as the state density bonus to help us streamline the development of Alvarado Village and increase the density of the site to support the project's financial feasibility. All right, so before we continue on with our feasibility analysis, I just want to touch on some affordable housing jargon that we use in the industry to determine household income. Area median income, which is often referred to as AMI, is a key metric we use to determine a household's eligibility for federal, state, and local affordable housing programs. It's defined as the midpoint or 100% AMI in a region's income distribution on a scale of 0 to 200%. And essentially half of the population in a region earn less than the area median income, while the other half earn above the area median income. So low-income housing tax credits have been the most important funding source for both the production and preservation of affordable housing in recent decades. And 60% AMI is an important threshold to consider for affordable housing developments because units serving households above 60% AMI don't qualify for tax credit funding. And what we found is that it's actually more challenging to identify public financing programs for housing developments serving households above 60% AMI. And this was important to consider as we began to think about which school district employees our development would serve. We found that tax credit funding is best suited for classified employees based on annual salaries. And the through line here is that educated workforce housing serving households above 60% AMI will need to pursue a financing plan without low-income housing tax credits. So there's a variety of residential typologies ranging from dense high rises to low density single family homes. And as we were developing our proposal for Alvarado Village, we were mindful of the site's location and staff population being served as we were choosing the most appropriate residential typology for the site. Handing it over to you, Ruchi.
For our market analysis, we utilize a combination of data from 2 well-known real estate data sources, that's Costa and S3 Business Analyst. We established a 1 mile boundary from the site to understand the market demand and determined that the average household size is just over 2.5 with a median age of 41, with millennials leading the numbers at 25%. Household size is an important metric because it tells us that there is likely market demand for family housing with 2 or more bedrooms. The median household income is also expected to increase through 2027, suggesting that housing preferences in the area might change with rising incomes. Also, there's a constantly rising home value in 2022 with an even higher forecast in 2027, which has decreased the housing affordability index. Next slide, please. For Alvarado Village, we ended up proposing a mid-rise family housing development with 77 units, averaging 58.5% AMI, and mostly targeting classified staff, promoting a balanced supply of housing types, densities, and prices. The total development cost to build these 77 units of family housing is around $58.6 million, roughly $761,000 per unit. We ended up proposing a combination of 9% Fed tax credit, state tax credits, and permanent financing from the California Housing Finance Agency's Mixed Income Program. While applying for these funding applications, we really need to be aware that multiple sources of funding should be planned as backup and fallback options, as funding applications might get rejected as well. Over to you, Preston.
All right. So we learned a lot from Alvarado Village, and we'd like to highlight the top 3 lessons we learned. Firstly, during the site identification phase, identify underutilized sites that are larger than 1 acre to support a range of densities and residential typologies. An underutilized site doesn't necessarily mean vacant. It can include large sites with a small building footprint like Alvarado School or parking lots, for example. Secondly, also during the site identification phase, survey staff to identify demographic housing preferences and the greatest housing need. We ended up proposing a pretty dense mid-rise project at 77 dwelling units per acre, but we were ultimately unsure if there would be sufficient interest among classified staff in West Contra Costa Unified to fill those 77 units. We were also unsure if school district staff want to live next to each other in the same building, which begins to blur the line between personal and professional life. So it's very important to understand the demographic housing need and preferences of school district staff early on to create a residential development that meets the needs of school district staff. And thirdly, as you're running feasibility studies, consider a mixed income development that blends affordable and market rate housing. We had a tough time coming up with the feasible financing plan for a project that's 100% affordable. So blending market rate housing in the same project can support financial feasibility by subsidizing both low rent units and building maintenance with the rents from higher income households. All right, so that's a wrap for us. Thanks for having us. And we're happy to answer any questions that come up for us during Q&A. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ruchi and Preston. Appreciate you. And next up from Bridge Housing, Martin Leung, one of the regional low-income housing developer managers, and he's the Director of Acquisitions and Planning. Mr. Leung.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon or good night, everyone, actually. Thanks for having me here. My name is Martin Leung. I'm the Director of Acquisitions at Bridge Housing. I'm going to put my presentation up here so you can all see it. So Bridge is a nonprofit mission-driven developer, owner, and property manager. We were founded in San Francisco in 1983. We'll soon be celebrating our 40th anniversary. We were founded almost 4 decades ago, really on the premise of trying to solve the housing crisis. And the housing crisis, as we all know, is getting worse and worse every year. And it's starting to affect, usually when we think about housing crisis, we're thinking about the folks that are living on the streets, but it's really affecting even middle class working folks, including some of our teachers. And I think something that we're really proud of at Bridge is we're not only working for housing and developing housing and managing housing for folks working at the 30% of the area median income, but we're also doing mixed income housing, as well as AMIs all the way up to 100%, even sometimes 120%, to foster some of these mixed income communities that I think Preston and Ruchi just mentioned. So we have a lot of experiences with partnerships with school districts, as well as public agencies and transit agencies to help develop their underutilized land. Partnership has always been in our DNA, and we're really proud of the partnerships that we have with San Diego Unified, LA Unified, and most recently with the City College of San Francisco. So I know one of the things that as a school board member, I imagine is very challenging is to understand, how do you adapt your day-to-day job and try to carve out time to think about housing developments, which is a completely different industry and different business. As Preston and Ruchi alluded to, and I think as the folks at CBSA referred to previously, you're not in this alone. This has been done in San Mateo County. It's being done in Santa Clara County. It's being done in Napa. So there is a lot of established precedents and processes that we can learn from and build from. We do not need to reinvent the wheel because it's already there. So here's a typical process of what it takes to develop an affordable housing project, including a teacher housing project. Oftentimes, a public agency will come to us. They'll run something called request for qualifications, request for proposal, similar to any other public procurement process you might have at the school district. And this could be either led by district staff or it could be consultant staff that leads the process. And once we negotiate a purchase and sale agreement or a ground lease agreement, the responsibilities really shift to the developer. There are many folks in our industry, including Bridge, who are active and very familiar with the design and entitlement process, and especially the financing process, which is the most challenging and difficult. I would say, out of the 6 steps that I've listed out here, the financing is probably the most complex and time-consuming of all of those. From the initial RFQ to the negotiation of the purchase and sale agreement or ground lease, and that might take up to a year. Whereas the financing is really the most unpredictable part. As Preston and Ruchi alluded to before, a typical project might have 5 to 6 different funding sources. And I think I have seen, personally worked on projects that have as many as 12, 13, 14, sometimes 15 different funding sources. And I think some of the expertise in the affordable housing industry can be brought to the table once a developer is selected. And it's our responsibility as a developer to really cobble together these sources from the local level, county level, and the state level, and the federal level, and bring all of these pieces together. Construction, once the financing is put together, typically takes about 2 years. And then in Bridge's case, we are a vertically integrated company. We're not just a developer, but we're also a manager as well, property manager. So we are also going to be responsible for things like lease up, as well as the ongoing operation and maintenance. And not all developers are the same. So we're a little unique in that aspect. Some of the best practices that we've realized over the last 40 years is, and especially on teacher housing, is we really need a mix of incomes to serve the really broad range of folks that work at a school district. We very intentionally call this educator housing and not teacher housing because we recognize there is a lot of support staff all the way from janitors up to sometimes even entry-level administrators, right, who have housing needs that need to be met. And as the folks at the lab mentioned before, Preston and Ruchi, having that large range of income not only ensures that we serve the biggest range of people, but also allows us to cross-subsidize and ensure that the project itself is financially feasible to allow the higher income households to cross-subsidize the lower income households and ensure the project is financially sustainable as well. One thing that I want to highlight is when we say underutilized land, we're not just talking about surplus land that is literally vacant, but we're also talking about empty offices, underutilized parking lots that might no longer be used. This can be either a purchase and sale agreement with a developer, or most often it's going to be a low or no cost ground lease that lasts for anywhere from 55 to 99 years. Something that we've really been appreciative of as developers and owners and managers is all the things that the legislature is doing to support the affordable housing industry. Specifically, there's the property tax exemption that allows school districts properties, including teacher housing projects, to be exempt from property taxes, regardless of what the income served is. So technically speaking, there could be a market rate project that serves educators and staff, and that would be property tax exempt. Another things that we've seen that's common with districts is the issuance of certificates of participation, or COPs. Just like geo bonds, these are tax exempt and lowers the borrowing costs to the project, and makes the project more financially feasible. But unlike geo bonds, these are backed by project specific revenues. So that is beneficial from a risk mitigation perspective. And then finally, there's been positive changes in terms of the rules that we're subject to in terms of fair housing. I think in previous years, we are able to only affirmatively market to district employees. And I think with recent changes and regulations, we are able to enact a preference for any staff that is working in the educational sphere for any school district. And in some cases where a city or local jurisdiction has a local preference that's been vetted through HUD, fair housing law, you can overlap the preference for educators with the local preference to enact what is basically a preference for a specific school district. That is, a very complex area of law, and I highly advise you to consult your housing lawyer on this one. But we have seen it done before, specifically in San Francisco and a few other districts. It is quite complex, but it has been done before, and there is precedence. I want to showcase or profile two projects we've done. This is from 2015 when we first opened this project for LA Unified called Sage Park. It's about 90 units. And the rents at this project was intended to be affordable to folks earning anywhere from 30% up to 60% of the area median income. There is, in addition to the housing, a community center, public gardens, as well as LAPD runs a juvenile impact program within the project. So there is a good mix of not just residential uses, but also, school district related uses, as well as other public facilities within the project. We used low-income housing tax credits, as well as funding from the city itself, and LA Unified donated the land to us in this instance to help make the project financially feasible. Something that we're actively working on right now in San Francisco is a partnership with City College in the Public Utilities District in San Francisco. It's called Balboa Reservoir. This is very unique, and I'm really excited about this because of how we're able to not just serve the kind of conventional quote unquote tax credit housing population, which is generally up to 60% of the area median income, but we're actually able to serve moderate income, kind of middle income educators as well, between 61 to 100% of the area median income. And the reason we're able to do this is, in addition to capping low-income housing tax credits for roughly half of this 159 unit project, for the other half that's serving kind of moderate income educators, we're using the sale proceeds from the sale of townhome pads to a townhome developer, and using that extra revenue to cross-subsidize from a market rate townhome to cross-subsidize this educator project. So I think, earlier in the CBSA or CSBA presentation, they mentioned, looking at larger sites and also looking at not just, the specific site where you're developing housing, but also looking at other parts of your real estate portfolio to see if there are any other sites that, if they're not suitable for school district use or they're not suitable for teacher housing, could we ground lease it or sell it for revenue generation purposes and use that revenue to subsidize the teacher housing project. So this is exactly what we're doing here. And we're able to, as I mentioned before, subject to all the complex fair housing laws that we're subject to, we're able to give a preference to City College and SFUSD staff. And this is a pretty unique project in that this is not only teacher housing, but it's actually 3 other affordable housing projects as part of Balboa Reservoir, in addition to market rate housing. So it's a pretty exciting master plan project that we're hoping to bring to San Francisco very soon. So thank you for having me today. Appreciate your time.
Mr. Long, thank you very much. One real quick question, this one specific to your presentation. You were asked, who has the authority to issue that certificate of participation that you mentioned?
This would be the district.
Okay, great. All right. Lastly, we have Maureen Toms. She's a Contra Costa County leader in low and moderate income housing developments. Ms. Toms, go ahead.
Let me just get set up on sharing my screen. Be just a moment here. Share. And okay, looks like I'm sharing. So good evening. My name is Maureen Toms, and I want to thank you for joining this discussion on this important topic of housing. I want to recognize our hosts for this event, Madeline, Consuelo, and Chuck, and their many years of community service in the area of education and workforce. I've been a land use planner for Contra Costa County for more than 30 years. And I'd like to share with all of you, some examples of housing projects that I've worked on. The 6th cycle housing element that all the different jurisdictions were to adopt by January of this year. Some examples of some opportunity sites and best practices for public-private partnerships. So I want to make sure that you're seeing my next slide on Pleasant Hill BART. So one of our largest projects involves the unincorporated community serving or surrounding the Pleasant Hill Contra Costa Center BART station area. The entire area is under a specific plan that has high density residential, commercial offices, hotels, some retail, and some open space trails such as the Iron Horse Trail. In 2005, the County Redevelopment Agency, the county, and BART established a leasing authority or a joint powers authority to cover future development of the 18-acre BART surface parking lot. Following the expansion of the BART parking garage, which was paid for by the redevelopment agency, the surface parking lot became available for development. Our private partner for the development is Avalon Bay, and to date, they have built 622 residential units, with 84 of those units affordable to low-income households. There's one development block that has yet to be developed, and that may end up being additional housing. Avalon Bay makes annual lease payments to the leasing authority, and then those revenues are split between the two public agencies, and that's the county and BART. And then across the, oops, I went too far. Across the street from the BART parking garage is another project developed by Bridge Housing and Holiday Development. This is a mixed income project with market rate townhomes and affordable rental. The property was originally purchased by the redevelopment agency, and the redevelopment agency then solicited development proposals, as was previously mentioned. The redevelopment agency sold the property to Bridge and Holiday Development, and the Bridge portion, which was the affordable portion of the deal, had a purchase and sale agreement with terms that included a carryback loan. The redevelopment agency is then paid back through residual receipts, and the land value is also used to leverage other funding for the project. And let me get over here. Okay, and the last example I want to share with you is a project that we're working on near the Pittsburgh Bay Point BART station area. So this is on this site is a 7-acre piece of property that was assembled by the county at the time, the redevelopment agency. And we issued a request for developer proposals and qualifications. And we selected a developer for the site called Pacific Communities Incorporated. And they're developing a 3-phase project with a total of 384 multifamily affordable housing units. And we're also working to relocate a very small library that's in Bay Point, that's currently co-located with a middle school in Bay Point, to the first phase of this project. Now I want to share a little bit of information on housing elements. And let's see. So this year, all of the jurisdictions in the Bay Area were to have adopted their new housing elements. And the state determined that the need for the entire Bay Area was 441,176 units. Now, these needed to be split between all of the jurisdictions in the Bay Area. And then they were also split within the jurisdictions in Contra Costa County. There's 20 jurisdictions with 19 cities plus unincorporated county. Just so happened that the unincorporated county got the biggest number to plan for, and that was over 7,600 units. So in trying to develop our housing element, we had to scour all the unincorporated communities throughout the county to see where we could accommodate that housing. We don't build the housing, but we have to plan for it. So we have to set the table in our general plan policies and our zoning to accommodate it. So I'm going to share with you a couple of examples that are in our housing element as far as sites. But before I do that, I wanted to also share with you, you did get some of the numbers about what our area median income is. My numbers are from 2022 that are in our housing element. So this has, on a previous presentation, there were updated numbers that were from 2023. But if you take a look at, a family of 4 making $109,600, that's considered low income. And that's, it's surprising that, for years, there's been a lot of pushback for providing housing for that demographic. This slide also shows the affordability levels that the county had to plan for. And so in addition to just the 7,610 units, our goals are to have 2,072 units for very low income, 1,194 for low, and 1,211 for moderate. So now in this part of my presentation, I'm going to talk about some opportunities that exist. While we were developing our housing element, we reached out to the capital facility staff of the West Contra Costa Unified School District. And I have to confess that I served for 6 years on the Citizens Oversight Board. So I was really familiar with a lot of these sites. This first one is the the former site of Seaview Elementary School in the Bayview area of West Contra Costa County. So the property is owned by the school district, and we determined with adjusting our general plan and zoning that it could accommodate about 201 units. It's on both sides of Garrity Creek. The property is, so there's also an opportunity to do a joint project with East Bay Regional Park District, because there is a gap in the Bay Trail. And in filling that gap, there's going to have to be a crossing of this creek. So that could be an interior roadway to accommodate, development on both sides of the creek, and also serve as part of the Bay Trail. The next site, let's see if I got this, is the former Adams Middle School site. This is in the East Richmond Heights neighborhood. And the county housing element identifies that this could accommodate approximately 50 units. You might think that it could accommodate more, but there are some seismic issues that future development will have to address on this site. Then the next site, next example, is in Alamo. The Mozzie School site in unincorporated Alamo. The rear of this site is underutilized, and it could accommodate approximately 10 units, whether it's for student housing, and this school site is for, I believe it's for children as well as adults with special needs. And, so there could be housing for, the clients that are served at the school, or the teachers at the school, or teachers throughout the school district. And let's see. Now I wanted to just talk to, give you some ideas of some key elements of successful public-private partnerships that we have encountered over the years. Number one, you have to have political leadership. You have to have the commitment from the top, political support, and you have to address the public issues and the misconceptions. Proactive public sector involvement is incredibly important. You have to have a good plan, a good vision, sustainable land use, a sound business plan, and you have to keep it simple and minimize the bureaucratic process. The income stream, it's important. I mentioned that there's an income stream at the Pleasant Hill BART station area. The first tranche of funds that come from the lease revenues are coming back to the county because the county built the replacement parking garage. But once that is repaid, then there's a split between the two public agencies. So, it's a win-win. The other piece of it, very similar to teacher housing, is that the housing development at the BART station, typically somebody doesn't want to live there unless they're really going to use BART. And they can use BART without BART having to pay for parking, which is expensive. You need to have communications and engagement with the community. And then you have to select the right partner. And the partner could also be your consultant team. The school district staff, they don't do housing development, but there are partners that you can put on your team that are experts in that area. And, we can help identify the processes that we have gone through. We've gotten real estate economists, very similar to our grad students at UC Berkeley. We've had housing developers, both market rate housing developers and the nonprofit housing developers on our team. one of the reasons you would have the real estate economist is you want to make sure it's a good deal for the school district. You've got to protect the public's interest there. So, and then I would be happy to answer questions when that time comes. I have some links here and I'm going to put them in the chat as well, because I know that links are hard to come by when you're looking at a slideshow. So I'll put those in now. And let's see. There you go. So thank you so much again.
Great, Ms. Thoms, thank you so much. There have been a few people who unfortunately had to drop off. Mr. Keller from CSBA said that he dropped his email in the chat for anybody who has questions for CSBA, akeller@csba.org. And then some great comments and some questions. I'm not certain we're going to be able to answer all these questions, probably because I'm not certain which presentation each one of them represents. But one was at 6:44. This may have been Mr. Grayson's presentation. He was talking about an initiative, I believe, and Ms. Ramos asked, can you repeat the 3 resistance faced by this initiative? And if anybody remembers, or if it's someone else's presentation, please pipe in here. But I did want to bring up a couple of other things as well. Ms. Ramos also asked, how is the county involved in this initiative to support unincorporated areas such as Rodeo? Does anybody have any thoughts on that before we move on?
I can address that in that the county does do the planning for the unincorporated area of Rodeo. Along these lines, I'm not aware of John Sweat Unified School District owning any property, but we do have some surplus properties that would be available for development. It wouldn't be along the lines of the SB, the bill that has been discussed, but it certainly could be along the lines of some of the other projects that I've covered.
Great, thank you for that. By the way, you also mentioned Adams Middle School.
Yes.
Coincidentally, I attended when I was a kid. But is the issue there, because it's a huge piece of land?
It is.
Is the issue there that actually sits on the fault?
It does sit on the fault. So, and it is hilly. So there are some areas that could be developed, and there would have to be some engineering involved with developing that site. But it's got great views, and it's something that, that could be a great development for about 50 units.
Yeah, it's a wonderful piece of land, no doubt
Yeah.
about it. Earlier, Dr. Lathan said, as a former teacher and principal, I too wonder how staff would feel about housing next to their colleagues. That is, if there's educator housing altogether. Maybe I think he may have been referring to when it might have been with the adult ed property. What would it look like when a person no longer works for the district? And of course, the issue of talking about how people might not want to live near each other. But so what does it look like when a person no longer works for a school district, and then how would they stay in that district housing? So if anybody can address that, that'd be great. Okay, we can come back to that if there's anybody else who joins us.
John, I was going to say I have one thing I can add to that, and Martin may have some additional information, but whenever there's public funding put into an affordable housing project, there is annual monitoring to make sure that the residents there still meet the affordability. So it's not clear to me if somebody leaves the district but still meets the affordability requirements, whether or not they would be asked to move out, or if they would be secure in where they're renting.
Great. Mr. Long, did you want to add something as well?
Yeah, agree with Maureen completely. And I think on the topic of what happens when somebody stops working for a district, I think in general, and every district does it differently. In the lease agreement, there is a stipulation that you must, move out within a certain period of time, and generally there's a grace period of, let's say, 2 years, but it is kind of a district by district decision.
Right. Maybe you all can address Ms. Wallace's series of questions here. Didn't hear a lot about how you build homes for teachers. How do you keep them for teachers? What if they stop teaching? What if there's a divorce and the teaching partner leaves? What if people retire? Are they entitled to live there forever? Ms. Toms, what do you think about that?
I think as long as they meet the affordability requirements, that they could live there, unless there's something else that was mentioned that, they would have a 2-year grace period to find something else, if that's built into the lease.
Great, excellent. Mr. Sponsler is here from Mr. Grayson's office, and maybe that, I do believe this, I believe it was Mr. Grayson talking about his initiative that was, there was some resistance faced by the initiative. Can you name that, Mr. Sponsler, and what that was? That someone wanted to hear those repeated, the 3 things that were problematic there.
I can jump in. I think it's going to be easier to speak versus typing it in, because I'm not quite clear on what the resistance might mean. The assembly member did mention some resistance or obstacles that housing faces. As far as AB 2295 specifically is concerned, I need clarity on the resistance spoken about, because the bill did pass last year. So any resistance that it may have faced in the legislative process, it did overcome, was signed into law. So anything now would be relative to implementation. So resistance to the legislation itself, I'm just curious on more clarity. If there's specific things that you want clarity on that this legislation addressed, I can try to address those from some of Mr. Grayson's talking points.
Great. Ms. Ramos, if you want to enter anything in the chat or even jump on here, that you'd be welcome to address any of those concerns that you raised. Mr. Sponsor, I did want to ask something that's kind of more about housing in general. I know that, there's been a little bit of talk of this, but as of last quarter, there was like 32% vacancy in office space in San Francisco. And certainly in a lot of urban areas. Oakland, I'm sure, has a lot of the same kinds of issues. What are the chances of converting some of that office space to housing?
I think that's a great question, John. It is a question that I would not be able to answer specifically at this moment. I know that conversation is a conversation that has been brought up and is being had, not only in the local level or regional level, but on the state level. But legislation that's specific to that, likely due to where we are in the legislative process for this year, there isn't any legislation that I'm aware of. And if Mr. Wallace is on, he may be aware of something that he's free to jump in and correct me. But I am not personally aware of anything that I've seen come through our office that specifically addresses those types of infill projects. Just off the top of my head, and I am not a housing expert, I know that there are many presenters on here that would be more able to answer this potentially. I would assume that there would be some local zoning issues that might have to be faced when it comes to changing those office spaces and converting them to housing. But that might be something more specific to San Francisco zoning.
Great, thank you. Ms. Thomas, did you have any thoughts on the idea of converting office space?
Yeah, we have had that discussion in some areas of the county, and the developers seem to think that it would be easier to demolish and rebuild new housing just because of the requirements. If something was built in the 70s, it might not meet code and that sort of thing. Those are the kinds of inquiries we have had.
Great. One other question that I had also kind of just about the broader issue of the lack of housing, expensive housing in the entire state. is that I know that at least I've heard statistics in the past that something like 1 in 7 homes in the state of California is owned by some kind of Wall Street investment group. Is that true? And is there a way to get away from that? Because I know that in a lot of cases of investment housing, houses are simply left unavailable to the masses, maybe even empty. And so what can be done about that? Let's open up to anyone.
Can I suggest something? That's a big question. But for now, we want to look at the properties that school districts have and those properties, how those could be developed. So just in summary, just that, you know, the legislation has given the freedom to build now, and that this is not a new practice. There are people doing it successfully with the district property and creating education workforce housing. So the time is now for people to get together and have convenings, to partner with agencies so that they can get properties and have management in place where they can start generating some income as well. So building properties is very important, building partnerships. One of the ways you can begin with school districts is a resolution. A resolution gets the conversation started at your local area. And every school district is unique. They're not all going to be the same, how they proceed in this process. And, you know, think outside the box, form those teams and partnerships. And remember that workforce housing is an important part of our mission as school board members. We're to provide education, which means, you know, quality teachers. So workforce housing is implementing that mission of ours as well. So I just wanted to kind of summarize the things that we covered, and that our next steps, people can come together and network some more. We have a Facebook page, and we will respond to the chat questions as well, and have a group going so that people can help us move forward in this area so we can share. It's about sharing the information that we do have, and I'm so impressed, and just this has been really a great forum to start this conversation. Thank you, John. Thank you very much. This has been awesome. Are there any last words anyone wants to share?
Ms. Farmer asked, is there a standard RFP school districts can start from?
You can typically find sample RFPs on the internet from various jurisdictions. So if there's one catering just to school districts, I'm sure that you can Google that and find them. Or the CSBA group may have some samples to share.
Very good. Were there any other questions, John, that you could find?
Let me just go through one more time just to make sure we covered all of them.
All right.
Let's see. Ms. Kemp from San Ramon Valley Unified, will all the slide decks be shared with all the attendees? And I'd volunteer yes. Can we make sure that that happens?
Absolutely.
Let's see. And then Ms. Toms, you shared your contact information in the chat there. Thank you very much. And there was some great information also shared with from our friends at UC Berkeley. A report from the Urban Land Institute on Office to Housing Conversion. Perfect. And then Ms. Toms, you shared the Surplus Lands Act. Thank you very much. I think we covered it pretty well. yeah, I think we're good. So Ms. Laura, take it away.
Oh, thank you so very much. So look at that, 7:58. How efficient are we? So I want to do a lot of thank yous. Thank you to Madeline Cronenberg, my partner in crime here, that we just really have a passion about education and best practices, sharing information, and putting this all together. And I want to thank Trustee Sarah Butler, who actually shared this, my interest in doing this with other folks who said, let's do something, and picked up the ball and ran with it. And I want to thank Chuck Carpenter, Todd Groves, also a little think tank there. And I want to thank Devin Murphy, Mayor of Pinole, for his enthusiasm and support. And he's just been so great to support this effort as well. So that's it for me. And thank you all so much. And this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. Thank you all so much.